Tyler's favorite countdown video is back.
It is. I love it. It's the little prism with all the cool shimmer and stuff. I don't know. I love it. It's different.
We're joined today by someone that is famous in North Dakota, right?
I think that's a good way. Yeah, for sure. In the North Dakota legislative circles at bare minimum.
Or infamous.
Oh,
Or infamous.
there we go.
It's fair. It's fair. It's good to have you with us today, Dustin. Really excited to be able to come on. Yeah.
It's going to be an exciting day. We got a lot to talk about. Going to kind of break down some of what's happened in the first half of the legislative cycle, along with some anticipational stuff for the second half. But before we get into it, Dustin, you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell our viewers, if they're not familiar with you, a little bit of what your background is, where you come from.
Yeah, so I run the North Dakota Watchdog Network, and it's been around since 2012. It's a 501c3. Prior to that, we had been operating as the North Dakota Taxpayers Association, and before that, we were the North Dakota chapter of Americans for Prosperity. But that only lasted about 2 years before we went independent. And so I've been active in North Dakota politics since 2006. I did a short stint in Iowa, working for the Republican Party in Iowa, and ended up coming back here, getting lined up with Dwayne Sand and Ed Schaefer when they were running AFP in 07, 08. And as I say, it's all been downhill since then. And so, I started focusing on federal issues like everybody in politics does. And then at some point in life, you end up realizing, well, federal is not where you can actually do anything. So going more state and local since 2012. I would say that on federal issues, my peak involvement was during the Obamacare fight in 09 and 10.
Sure.
I was hired through an intermediary to basically be the point person for North Dakota against Obamacare under a campaign that was being run by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Mm-hmm. And so I've been dealing with all sorts of issues, state, local issues. I've run for local school boards a couple times, ran for Burleigh County Commission in 2022, been on Renaissance Zone board for Bismarck, even though I'm probably one of the strongest critics over the last 20 years against the program itself.
That's why you're on it though, right?
And I managed to get appointed to various boards and committees over the years because, there's not a lot of people that actually have studied this stuff to the point where they can, in a discussion or in a meeting, say, yeah, this happened in 2015, Yeah. And so I've somehow become the institutional knowledge guy, specifically with tax policy, but a few other things as well.
Nice. What was over the past many years? What's your favorite story that you've broke?
Well, I would say that the on an investigative journalism standpoint, probably the DSU, Dickinson State University diploma mill story is the cleanest issue that I've taken on. It was funneled. Some of the information was funneled to me by one of my former professors out there. And before I got into professional politics, I went to Dickinson State. I was the chairman of the College Republicans, argued all the time in class with all my professors.
Yeah.
But when I finally got out and was doing things, those folks that really didn't agree with my agendas realized that I had the better megaphone for getting information out. And that whole story metastasized based off of a professor sending me a survey of staff morale and learning that the issue was the Confucius Institutes that China was putting into colleges, even in North Dakota, taking office space from the professors, tenured professors even. Wow. So the entire diploma mill story started with professors upset about losing their office space. Wow. That's how it started.
And it all just snowballed from there.
Yeah. Yep.
It seems like that's how things happen. It's always not that big of a deal, but someone chooses that hill to die on, and then the bigger story comes out.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then when people start killing themselves, literally, then it becomes a much bigger issue too.
That's when it really takes hold at that point.
It's a fair point.
And with all of that, that kind of brings up we can touch on this quick since it got shut down in a committee, but real fast. What was your thoughts on the whole public records bill that was going on, trying to strengthen some of those routes for people to be able to get some of that information?
Well, so I understand why the charging for public records exists, because there are about 3 or 4 people that really abuse it and try to get like everything under the sun.
Sure.
And they do it in a very harassing way. But I've also been at the other end of this, which is so many agencies scare you away from looking by giving you a quote of a couple hundred or a couple $1,000 so that you
Whatever it
won't
might be.
ask for the information.
Mhm.
Over the years, I think the largest quote that I've ever gotten from any government entity was about $3,000, and the claim
Wow.
that it would take 3 months to do. We ended up resolving that because it was a misunderstanding of the scope of the request. Ended up paying about 300, and it took like 3 days.
Sure.
And then over the years, more and more, I've noticed that agencies are far more willing to offer up information without giving you that big estimate if they know that you're not going to use it to beat them over the head too much, or in my experience, if an agency or the people involved don't necessarily agree with the policy to begin with, they're more than happy to get the information out. They're happy anybody asked about it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think it kind of shows where I think a lot of people stood, at least citizens wise. I know on our end, and probably yours and Rob Port's as well, when we talked with him about it. I think that kind of represents where the legislature took that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So moving on then, time to go over the bigger picture. What are a couple of your biggest takeaways from the first half?
Well, the discussion over property tax has pretty much
Yeah.
gone the way that I expected, which is the legislature really is not keen on doing much of substance. They are pushing this 3% cap idea,
Mhm.
but I'm not that confident that anything significant on the reform side is going to happen. I do suspect that they will end up spending between $400 and $500 million in the name of property tax relief, but I don't know if it will actually have the intended result that the governor wanted, or whether the actual reforms will be done in a way that will create substantive change at the local level.
Yeah. I know one of the biggest things that the governor was pushing was to get that the primary residence buy down to be in effect within about 10 years. I know one of the latest amendments that kind of got pushed through before it went out that kind of makes that a little bit more murky now.
Yeah, they converted it from being a long-term phase-in program to being just a one-time thing that has to be renegotiated and redebated next time around, and then every legislative session. And that's not reform.
No.
Just
Right.
if it only covers 2 years, that's not reform.
But
Reform means changing the system to try to avoid getting back to the problem.
so do you feel like even if it was to continue for 10 years and you'd have the full buy down basically by the state, do you feel like that's reform? Because I don't even feel like that's reform.
Well, and Governor Armstrong's original plan was a 15-year phase-in program.
Yep.
And my criticism of it was that was way too slow. I put together a 6-year phase-in plan, which I thought was reasonable, and it did not involve first using general fund money and then switching it over to legacy fund. It was all about using legacy fund from the get-go.
Mhm.
But it's very obvious the legislature isn't willing even to do what the governor wanted at this point and create a long-term trajectory. And I think that part of that is because they probably have some genuine concerns about where the energy markets are going to go, because if Donald Trump's policies go into place and they do what they are intended to drive down the price of oil, because that's what the point of drill baby drill is,
For
to
sure.
drive down the price of oil, that doesn't help North Dakota. North Dakota is a counter-cyclical state. So when oil prices are high and the country is suffering economically because of high energy prices, that's when North Dakota does the best.
Right.
So for the country to do well, North Dakota has to not do so well, just by the way that the economics work.
Well, that stinks.
Yeah. But I think it really proved itself over that kind of '08 recession and '09 when most of the country was starting to get hammered by all kinds of high energy costs and the housing market crashing. North Dakota really had a resurgence and a boom in and of itself at that point.
Well, and North Dakota avoided the '08 housing crash because we socialized the housing market in the '80s during the farm crisis. We put the Bank of North Dakota and the State Housing Finance Agency into a position to buy loans on the secondary market from small town banks that would have otherwise been considered subprime by the '08 crisis standards. So we already socialized that market 25 years prior. So we rode out that storm because we were already socialist on the issue, and the oil boom was just starting to pick up, and that was able to push back against those national and international pressures.
Yeah.
But it was really down to luck when it comes down to it, because that was one of the last things the Democrats did when they were in charge of North Dakota. When Ag Commissioner Sarah Vogel was in charge, they pushed to make it so that the state was involved in buying these loans off the private market so that there would be less farm auctions and people could stay on the land. And so we dodged a bullet because the socialists actually struck gold on that one.
Right.
Yeah, and it works perfect for North Dakota's system too. It's something that is very specific to North Dakota and its economy, with that agrarian base, but also with how the energy side has really taken off in the recent couple decades.
With the way that the property tax bills are moving through the legislature, do you kind of wish that we did have a crystal ball, we could go back and maybe get Measure 4 passed?
So the difficulty with Measure 4 was that it didn't include a plan.
Right.
And that is always going to be the death nail to any sort of small government reform, is that if you don't have a plan on how to get to where you want to go, the other side, the status quo, is always going to win. So if you can't map out how you're going to do this, how you're going to afford it, it's going to go nowhere. And now that's why I push so strongly that if the people vote no on this, legislature has 2 sessions to figure this out,
right,
before there's going to be a real resurgence on trying to do it again. And I do believe that the next time that the public feels that it is important enough to put it on the ballot, it will succeed, even if the other side has $2 million. And I've suggested that next time they should consider doing a constitutional convention specifically on property taxes in North Dakota. You get the same signatures as the constitutional measure, bring in a new set of people to come up with a plan. You can put your people in there. They get elected from the public, but it's kind of like an independent legislature with new people that are not poisoned by the special interest groups. And I think that is the next approach that they should do. I've talked to some of them. They like the idea because, frankly, they're tired of having to defend the all or nothing approach. And the all or nothing approach is never going to work. It's just not. It's like you have to have a plan. You got to make it incremental so that you can defend the sustainability of it. And if you can't do those things, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's a really interesting concept, especially because when you start looking at how everyone gets so muddled down with there was almost 1,100 total bills that were submitted into this legislative cycle. You could really be able to take 2 weeks to a month out of time and just hammer down this issue from people from across the state. I think that could be something that could really, hopefully it could get some steam. That would be an interesting concept to see play out.
Yeah. And depending on what comes out of the session, I am hoping that either the legislature itself or the governor put together a blue ribbon task force on property tax reform, come up with a strategy. Let's get 40 people in the room that know how the system works, whether they're legislators, local government people, local government staff, and then those of us that have advocated for different changes over the years. And let's come up with a plan and then explain it to the public so that they can tell their legislators, this is what we want. The weakness in Kelly Armstrong's plan is that it kind of came at the end rather than at the beginning. And rather than coming up with a plan and a group to push it. They just waited for the election, waited for Measure 4 to fail, and then they threw something together that
Right.
sounds good. And it's better than what has been, because over the last 15 years, every attempt to cap local spending has hit a brick wall and can barely get 20 votes in the House, let alone the Senate. It gets 3 votes in the Senate.
Yep.
And so this did change the dynamic of the willingness of the legislature to talk about caps at all. But I don't think that they're going to get it in the first shot. And if they don't, even if they do, they need to come up with a more large-scale, long-term strategy themselves.
Yep.
But this at least is a bridge to get to a better idea.
Yeah. No, will be interesting for sure. So moving on from property tax and going to another interesting topic.
Sure.
And that is the not full-time, but a every year legislative session. A conversation that we've had locally is like, in Minot, personally, I feel like we need to increase the salary of our city councilman and our mayor. I think the mayor gets paid $1,500 a month, and the city council people get paid under
11 or 12.
Yeah, I think that's gross, or net. They get paid that. So very low, right? And so then at the legislature, obviously, we're not talking about raising their salary, although that would happen if we went to a more often one. But it seems like there's a lot of stuff that's going through the legislature, and as North Dakota continues to grow, there's a chance there'll be more. Where are you at? Where do you stand on the idea of us going to legislative cycle every year?
So I am a reluctant supporter of annual sessions. Like, I would like to avoid them, but I understand the reality, especially with term limits kicking in.
Right.
That the more turnover you have, the more aggressive you have to be in getting after these issues. And South Dakota, their sessions are very fast. They're 40 days each year.
Yep.
They're in and out. It doesn't grind on. Now, the one big thing that we need to avoid, we do not want to have a scenario where committees get kill power. South Dakota committee kill power gums up the works so bad. Yes, there's a parliamentary procedure to smoke out those bills and get them to the floor. But our system where every bill gets a vote, no matter how stupid it is actually a good thing, even though it gums up the works. It gums it up in a better direction. Now, with all that said, I think that we need to get to the point where if we don't go to annual sessions, I think we need to move the biennial session to the even number year, so that when you get elected in November of 2024, right now you get a month and a half to get ready for session. I would like to see that entire year to be used for the interim process, to get freshmen integrated into the process, be part of the interim system, understand what's going on. So they got a year under their belt of committee work before they have to draft their bills and decide these things, because only having 6 weeks of lead time may have worked in the old days when the people in the legislature were people who were on your city commission or county commission or whatever. We don't have that pipeline anymore to speak of. They're very distinct things. Now, it's still there for some people, but they're not as integrated as they used to be. And so if we don't go to annual sessions, we do need to, I believe, switch the year to the even number year. The other benefit of that, besides giving new elected officials a chance to get into the system, is then the session is so much closer to the election that the public doesn't forget what they did. Because right now, with a year and a half between the end of the session and the election, people forget.
And there's all the local elections that'll take place before those at that point too. You're going to have all your municipal stuff that'll be taking place. So by that point, spring of 2025 is out of the equation.
Right. Yeah. So I think switching that year would be huge.
I think bare minimum. And again, even if it does go to that yearly thing, I think something like what South Dakota does on a much more abbreviated time frame would be something that would be a lot more manageable for the state. And that way, when you do have those, like this year, almost 1,100 bills that are in the legislature, that could be, narrowed down a little bit and hopefully could be a little bit more manageable for a time consuming aspect of it.
There's one thing I know about you, Kyler. It's that you don't feel like government's big enough. It needs to grow a little bit. So I'm trying to help you. So yeah,
I love it.
where do you want to go next, Kyler?
Couple other ones that were interesting there. I know you talked about too a little on your site, Dustin, was those school lunch bills failing. What was your take on that one? I know
well,
you. Go ahead.
My take on that was that I view the school lunch issue as being part of the property tax reform piece, because education is funded by this local governments. I'm a subscriber to 100% K-12 funding. And if we can get to 100% K-12 funding, I think we should include covering lunches for the basic premise of we force kids to be in school, so we should just feed them while they're there.
Okay.
This argument that some conservatives have, and this is not really a partisan thing, because if you look at the vote on 1475, you had Democrats, liberal Republicans, and ultra-conservative Republicans voting yes, and the moderates were in the middle voting no.
It was a really weird breakdown. I noticed that one with that.
And that is because you have people there are the folks on the left are doing it because it feels good, right? The folks on the right want to save people money, whatever it takes. And so if this is a government entity taking money, let's reduce how much government takes money from people. And in a lot of ways, people who can't afford school lunch for their kids or on the free and reduced program don't own property. So they don't get a direct benefit from the property tax relief. So this is a way to give renters who have kids a direct benefit that will likely be more than the $500 tax credit that the primary residence folks were getting this last go around. So we should look at this as a way to save the public money. Any place that there is a revenue generating feature for government, we should look at reducing that drain on families, on taxpayers, and on everybody. And this idea that I got in a couple arguments with legislators who say, well, it's out of control. It's going to grow every year. Yeah, everything in government grows every year. I mean, they don't have any problems with subsidizing fertilizer plants $125 million. So why not feed the children?
And I feel like that would be something that could easily be something that's paid through from the legacy fund on a yearly basis.
But the food might not meet RFK standards.
Of course, the new MAHA standards.
And that's a separate thing. And if the state wants to have a little bit more control over that, then they can have it because they're funding it. They can have more rules there. And I can guarantee you the federal money is not going to go away if the state says you got to have better food. Right. That wouldn't make any sense. So I think that this is an issue where people need to start thinking outside the box.
That's fair. It's something that's kind of been on the cycle for a long time, and it hasn't ever had something that's substantive that's come from it. So it would be interesting to kind of take a different approach and see what happens with that. One other one, though, that's kind of going around is 1442. It's for lack of better terms, the North Dakota Doge Committee. I mean, it's not necessarily, it's a lot more government sponsored than like the actual Doge is, but
would you like that, right, Dustin?
So my take on this is that the budget committees and the interim committees are already supposed to be doing that.
Sure.
Like this is actually now Representative Tolman is one of the most conservative, if not the most conservative libertarian legislator we have. He's coming from a very genuine place with this bill. I think that if this is just going to be another interim committee that looks at various things, and the legislature does and does not care what interim committees say a lot. I intend that if this passes, to put together a citizen group to give that legislative committee recommendations. I'm hoping to recruit some local government people too on that, so that we can kind of get a more methodical approach. Like, I don't think it should be the way Elon Musk is doing. Elon's approach, that's not how you fix government. Just randomly sampling things and saying, oh, that looks dumb, and let's pull that out. That doesn't work. Plus, it's a power grab, and we don't want the executive to have more power. We want Congress to take back its power. So we're going the wrong direction on the implementation side as well.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit fun though.
It's fun for some people, but if you want long-term sustainable smaller government,
Right.
you can't just act like a spreadsheet AI system is going to tell you what to do. I mean, at that point, why do we even have elected officials?
Yeah, we could automate it all at that stage.
Yeah, but don't present stuff like that because
Right, don't give them ideas.
Yeah, it may become reality.
And well, I just, my biggest thing with it is just the pettiness that it feels is coming through some of the actions that are there. It feels like these, I mean, you can argue that the people they're eliminating might need to be eliminated, but they are people too. And I don't know, it feels a little unnecessary from some of the standpoints they come from.
Yeah. That's a whole nother discussion. Then
Right,
we don't have it on the topic list
that's
today.
national.
So
I know we're stepping off a little bit
we'll
there.
have to readjust a little bit. So in North Dakota legislature, though, we've had some very good times with these culture war. I'm choosing to be positive. Okay.
Yes.
They have not been good times. There have been some very difficult discussions I've been having with some of the culture war bills that have been coming up, such as naming Jesus Christ as king or the kingship of Jesus Christ in North Dakota. Things that hit closer to home were the
resolution to have the Supreme Court denounce the establish marriage between a man and a woman.
Right. Yeah. But even beyond those resolutions was like making abortion a crime.
Yeah.
Things like that. Interesting that these things are coming up. I don't know that it's a surprise based off some of the people that were elected and how they ran. They ran very strong on their faith. But how do you feel about stuff like that? The question that we've asked is like, where does this separation of church and state truly begin? Like, do we go under the premise that America was founded as a Christian nation? Is that fair or is that unfair? I don't know.
I think that the culture war issues, by their very nature, reject the concept of smaller government. By taking them on, all of these culture war issues, in order to enforce those beliefs, require more government.
Yeah.
And if you require more government to enforce your ideas, you're not reducing the size of government, you're increasing it. And if you increase it for your issues, the other guys can use that power down the road for their issues too. And I think that conservatives are very close to crossing the line of being anti-woke to having their own version of wokeness.
It's like, that's interesting.
And I think one thing too, with I have mentioned this before. It felt like so much of this was on the headlines of the agenda from two years ago on the last legislative cycle, and it felt like this was something that was going to be a little bit more in the past, and now it's presented not just as it's been a very strong presence in the forefront of this cycle as well. And I think it's taken away some of the spotlight from some of those other issues that we've kind of been seeing.
Well, I feel like large government is fine as long as it's me making it large. As long as it's large in the areas that I want it large, right? And
well, in North Dakota, the rule is Democrat socialism bad, Republican socialism good.
Of course,
exactly.
That's how everything has been since the beginning of the statehood.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it goes back to the NPL where they were just running back and forth between each party and trying to build up their own standings in that party. Mm-hmm. It's been shaped into this. And
I will say this, though. I don't think that abortion topic is going away. Yeah. I think it's going to be back in future sessions. And I'm curious, like, what's the chance? Do you see that being passed eventually? Abortion becoming a crime in North Dakota? Is it even really feasible?
I don't think it's feasible. I don't think we should be doing it because all of these bills, all of these approaches to make things illegal in North Dakota, all that is doing is making North Dakota a less attractive place to bring people in. If we want to diversify our economy, and we spend all this money. You look at Doug Burgum's agenda when he was governor. Mm-hmm. He wanted to spend all sorts of public money to diversify the economy, to make it a tech thing. Guess what? The tech world is liberal. And so if you want the people to do the work in that world, you can't make laws to discourage them from coming here, because all you're doing there is making it so that you have a company that is on paper in North Dakota, but their employees are in another state, and you spent public money to do it. There's no point to that. If those employees and that company aren't truly on the ground in North Dakota, and those employees aren't paying tax into the North Dakota system and aren't spending money with North Dakota businesses, there's no point to doing any of that.
No, it's
So
not really
so
benefiting.
when we create resolutions and laws to discourage gays or LGBT or whatever they want to call themselves these days, all we're doing is cutting our own nose off. Because if we want to get away from being beholden to energy and agriculture, we need the people that do things outside of those two areas.
Yeah.
And if we don't have those people, there's no point in even going down that road.
Right. Yeah, I see that.
Mhm.
I think which isn't, you're talking more the gay marriage one. I think the abortion one's going to be interesting because it will discourage people, but already we're very strongly against abortion in North Dakota. And I think it could even pit families against each other, because that's almost what it sounds like it has to do in order for it to actually be implemented. But that just depends on who you talk to.
It does have the potential to be very divisive.
It does that. That's how legislation works sometimes.
It's crazy how that plays out. One other one, I guess. Well, before we do, is there any like other resolutions or measures you want to discuss before we kind of start looking at the second half?
I think that looking at the attack on initiated measures and the powers reserved to the people is
that's a
very
good one.
important in all this discussion, because conservatives are the ones in the last decade and a half that have been utilizing the initiative measure process the most to push the agenda. And while some liberal-ish issues have gone through because they're well-funded, that is not a reason to attack the system. And I've been a defender of the initiative measure process now for 15 years. We have had in the last 4 years multiple attacks on it, where the legislature wants to put themselves in with veto power, or make it more difficult to get on the ballot or get it passed. This session, we're likely to have 3 separate constitutional measures that get out of the legislature in some form. The 60% rule that would require 60% vote on constitutional measures would make it very difficult to do anything meaningful, because anything meaningful is controversial. And controversial issues don't get more than 60%. The single subject rule was rejected last election because it was not defined. It's still not defined. It gives one person, the Secretary of State, essentially backdoor veto power.
Sure.
And that it's a bad idea to pass constitutional measures if we can't define what we're actually trying to do. I provided over 200 pages of legal material from around the country on that issue, showing that this it is ripe for abuse. It gets abused. And if you're going to do it, you have to define it. The committee didn't agree. They just passed it out. The other thing that is going to be a big conflict point is term limits. Part of the term limits measure that was passed in 2022 included a provision that said that the legislature cannot originate proposals to change it, that any changes must originate with the petition process as it started in the first place. They want to change that for themselves, and then some of the resolutions have adding term limits onto the statewide electeds. But this really comes down to, even if you are not in favor of term limits, even if you would like to repeal it, you should not be in favor of openly violating the Constitution as the citizens voted. They voted this measure in with the provision that said the legislature can't change this and can't propose changes to it. We're going to have ultimately a Supreme Court case on that, I think, because either the term limits folks or somebody else is going to file a lawsuit saying the Constitution says the legislature can't do this, so this can't even be on the ballot. I think both sides want to see that actual case work out, because it will determine a lot of other things. I've been pursuing for better part of a decade the idea that any changes to Article 3, amending the initiated measure process itself, must originate with the initiated measure process. So the legislature cannot do that. So I'd like to see that issue decided in court before I go and spend time and money trying to protect the people's right to use the process. Because if the courts are going to overrule the ability of the people to actually define the terms and conditions for their government, then we're losing all sorts of freedom here.
Yeah, it has the potential to. And I got one quick one on the ballot changing. I just find it interesting that they only need to pass that by a 50% margin, but it requires us then to have a 60% margin. On top of that, though, with the term limits, we had Ole Larson on our show last Thursday, and he was obviously one of the big proponents behind those. And it was interesting because he seemed almost open to the thought that in hindsight, maybe it should have been 3 year terms instead of 2, but that was just kind of interesting to me when we had him on. From one of the big takeaways, he seemed like he could have been open to that in the first place, but now that it's changed and it's implemented, obviously he's, I believe, on the same side as you, with he doesn't want to see the constitutional part of it affected.
When they reached out to me to be a sponsor of that measure, I was advocating for 16 years lifetime any way you want them. So if you want to do 16 years in the House or 16 in the Senate, you don't shift around. It doesn't actually create any meaningful effect. It takes a term or two to figure out what's going on. But if you haven't gotten done what you want to get done in 4 terms, you probably aren't going to. So 16 years is kind of the right balance, I think. It's not too long, and it doesn't require the shifting of back and forth. We're going to see some negative effects from term limits when this happens, because the newly elected are not up to speed. That's why the previous discussion about, do we go annual? Do we change what year we meet in? That's going to become a bigger and bigger issue as we see the negative impacts of term limits.
It feels like they've kind of pushed that off till like the end of this decade. Then come the 2030s is when that's really going to start taking shape again.
Yep.
Yeah, I think if you asked a lot of people that were proponents of term limits, that they would agree that 8 years is too short.
Yeah.
They just wanted to get it done. They felt like I shouldn't say they just wanted to get it done. They felt like there needed to be some kind of limit on there. And 8 years was however that came out. And so it moved forward.
I guess before we start wrapping up, any final things to look forward to in the second half of the cycle coming out of the crossover period here?
I think that it's just waiting to see how these various things shake out. When it comes to property taxes and local government control, there's still a few things that are up in the air on that. The amount of effort that has gone into trying to control or even blackmail local government to follow state policy, all because of local government's opposition to the CO2 pipeline and their citizens. We're seeing how that affects legislative action in North Dakota of trying to silence people, versus in South Dakota, where the people have risen up and literally revolted over this issue. That they've changed the dynamics in the legislature. They changed 20 seats over a referred measure. The Speaker of the House, the Speaker pro tem, 5 separate committee chairs are all anti-pipeline people. The Republican Party of South Dakota elected the chairman of the pipeline referral effort as their chairman. Multiple of their leadership are part of that. Their entire Republican structure has been overturned in South Dakota because of this one issue. While in North Dakota, our legislators are trying to do what they can to shut up the local government people and make it so they can't represent their own constituents. It's a tale of 2 worlds, really.
It's interesting how that's playing out, especially when you have someone that's been very, very associated with that just got elected to a federal office last fall too. And it'll be interesting to see how that one kind of plays out in the next couple months here. I look forward to watching that play out. And I think it could have maybe gotten a little bit more light in the picture if it weren't for some of those culture war bills. But also, like you said, it might have been just something that got suppressed regardless kind of deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sounds like it's been a good legislative cycle so far, and we got a lot to look forward to.
It's been a cycle so far.
Yeah. One other thing that I would point out is I think people in the state need to keep a very close eye to what's going on in Burleigh County. And I'm heavily involved in that, both from the standpoint of, we have implemented a sales tax at the county level to take over half of the county's property tax budget off of the property tax rolls for law enforcement. And then simultaneously, we're dealing with internal struggles that come from generational changes and turnover and the dynamic of hyper partisan politics getting injected into the local government system.
Yeah.
And so Burleigh County, I believe, even though I'm in the smack dab middle of it, the whole situation, I think is a microcosm for other local governments to watch and what to do and to avoid. So we're kind of an example for both the good and bad right now.
Sure.
And so I think it's important for others to look at this and see what's happening, to get out ahead of these problems before they metastasize locally in your city or county.
Try to build from one area's mistakes in order to avoid those same problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Dustin, thanks so much for coming on. We had a great, I think it was a great conversation. Appreciate you coming. We'll have to do it again at some point. And if any final words before we depart?
Go check out watchingnd.com. Sign up for the newsletter if you're not already on it. Pop in a donation, subscribe, whatever you need to do. Tune in to K Fire Radio on Wednesdays for Watchdog Wednesday. Daryl Lease and Josh Gallian and I, in kind of a rotational manner,
Sure.
try to cover all these sort of things, and just keep pressure on your elected officials, because if they stop hearing from you, they're going to think that you don't care, and they're going to get it out of control in a big way. Right now, they think that they're immune from the grassroots, I think, in a lot of ways. Even the ones that are freshly minted, even the new rookies who are there with a philosophical agenda, they have a tendency to not be in tune with the actual public, and they need to hear from people, good and bad, on these issues.
Without a doubt. I think
Absolutely. Well, appreciate you coming on, Dustin. It's been a good time, and we'll be in touch. So
undoubtedly.
All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you. It's good having Dustin with us.
That was fun conversation. It went very well, I think. Got a lot of insight on the state level a little bit, and I'm looking forward to the second half of our show coming around now.
Absolutely. We're doing a special 2-hour crossover edition. Second half of the show, we're going to be having Representative Scott Louser live and in studio with us. That'll be a good time.
If you couldn't tell, this is the legislative crossover, not the basketball kind, too, by the way.
Leave it to Kyler.
Yeah.
Leave it to Kyler.
I had to.
He had to. So he did.
Yes.
He came and he conquered. Did you follow mine at City Council last night?
I caught a little bit of it. I didn't catch the majority of it. Lasted about 3 hours.
Budget stuff is back.
I worked later last night, so I didn't get a chance to go in person, but I'm going to end up watching that tonight, and we look forward to talking with good old Leif Snyder about it on Thursday morning.
Right. This week we kind of switched things up, so more ND stuff is going on Tuesday, and Minot stuff will be happening on Thursday. But we asked Dustin about it, and we're going to ask Representative Louser here shortly about it, but I want to ask you about it. What was your favorite part so far about legislative session?
Ooh, my favorite part is just figuring it out. This is the first time in my life I've really dove.
So you're not even going to comment on one of the bills?
I mean, I'll throw the fun discussions we've had about property taxes.
That's your favorite one?
Yes.
Oh man, it's why is it not
the denunciation of 1176 to some degrees? But I've really
your favorite one would be the primary bill.
I mean, it's all day. But no, it's been a great experience so far, just from this aspect of it, trying to figure out how the session works from a third party standpoint, getting involved in everything. How about you, Jonathan? What's your favorite takeaway from this first half of it, Ben?
It's been interesting to watch the cultural bills. Not generally, it's been interesting to see them play out. I think it's good. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe there's too many of them, but having a couple of them in there, I think is a good thing. Because it does show where North Dakota comes from a little bit. And I think that part is important too. Like whether any of that stuff gets passed or not, I think it's a good for there to be a base. And a lot of people disagree with me on that one. That's all right.
Make a fair point.
But this is one thing I want to say on that.
Please.
Is that the people that disagree with me on that, I think that there's something in North Dakota where you have a lot of people that stay silent on a lot of matters. And that's one thing that's really interesting to me for North Dakota. I think you're trying to get your lighting fixed really bad.
No,
right now.
I'm looking at you.
Okay.
Sounds good. We're conversing.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Do I have you on the wrong side? Is that what you're saying?
No, we're fine. We're just chatting. I appreciate your point on that. I think you make a fair reason with it, and I look forward to seeing how the second half goes.
Yeah.
Really getting the crossover period finished up, and trying to get a hold on how it all finishes up now that we really start seeing the governor start signing some legislation.
Yeah, and Marie asked which cultural war bills. There have been a few of them. One of them is there's been some the resolution that you're talking about.
Yeah,
for the standing against gay marriage.
Yes, to try to get the Supreme Court to renounce their decision to allow openness for marriage and to just define marriage between a man and a woman. There was the Christ is King one for the
kingship of Jesus Christ.
Yep, the kingship of Jesus Christ for the state. There's been a couple other interesting ones where it's maybe a little less culture war-y, but just where they're trying to send a message to the federal government, whether it be a congratulations to President Trump or whether it be to try to encourage.
They also did a congratulations to NDSU, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a problem with that one too?
No, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
That's relevant to the state. And then there's also, I think, one where they were talking about trying to encourage the federal government to annex Greenland. I don't think that one passed, but I know it was in there as well. And it's just a number of things that
those are resolutions, but there's also some bills. I think the abortion one is probably the strongest one.
Yep.
And there've been a couple more like that have come out, which they've been interesting. Good discussions had. See where they go in the future. Do you have any hot takes today?
I got a hot take. This is gonna be a fun episode.
Okay. So with that hot take, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a 60-second break, and we're gonna jump on to the segment with Representative Louser a little bit early.
Exactly. I look forward to it.
Sound like a plan?
We're gonna get them rolling here.
All right. Sounds good.
In the demanding world of oil and gas, precision, safety, and efficiency are non-negotiable. Unmanned operator drone services revolutionizes how you monitor, inspect, and manage your operations. With cutting-edge technology and expert operators, we deliver real-time data, detailed reports, and actionable insights for our valuable clients. Why risk the safety of your team or waste precious time? Our drones access even the most challenging areas with ease, reducing downtime and enhancing safety across your sites. We take the guesswork out of your projects by offering LiDAR, mapping, and inspection services so that your projects stay safe, on budget, and on time. Unmanned operator drone services, where technology meets safety, precision, and efficiency. Contact us today to elevate your operations.
We're live.
I'm going to have...
Welcome.
Sounds
Thanks for
good.
joining us. Oh, we're getting the cameras a little bit adjusted here, but we have Representative Scott Louser from District 5 here in Minot here with us, part of the crossover period. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me on this nice spring day.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to get nice out, and all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I woke up, little blanket of snow out there, not a ton, but just enough to make everything annoying.
Yeah, exactly.
What's up with that? The weather's been beautiful the last week, though.
It has. We've been lucky.
So much snow melt. City's been having problems, and I'm fine with it.
I'll take it in a heartbeat compared to the 20 below stuff we were dealing with earlier.
So busy first half. Well, but is it the first half or is it the first third? Where are we actually at in it?
I think I want to say we're 34 days in.
Okay. Yep.
34 gavel days.
Yep.
We refer to it as the first third.
Okay.
Because we refer to the third as conference committees.
Sure.
Okay. I see. I had heard you mention something about that before. So, so far though, what's your feedback on this legislative cycle? Has it been productive? Are there some frustrations you have?
Yeah, there's always frustrations.
Of course.
Probably more this session, I have to admit, than I've seen in the past. I think we had 200 more bills in the House this session than what we've had, at least in my career.
Wow.
We had over 100 bills that we had to vote on the last 2.5 days.
Just a marathon at the end.
It is. And those last 2 weeks, we were going, at least on my committee and on the floor, 13 hours a day.
Wow.
And I was trying to drive back to see my kids, and it's exhausting.
How do you stay educated on all the bills when you're voting on that many of them?
Well, some of it is experience. A lot of that stuff you've seen before. For me, a lot of it's new because I'm on appropriations for the first time. This is my 8th session. I've not been on appropriations.
That's right.
So having to learn not just the appropriations process, but we are doing something different this session than what we've ever done with the employee, the vacancy pool, where we used to give agencies money to hire people. If they didn't hire, they were able to keep the money and pay out bonuses and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Last session, we created a pool where Office of Management and Budget keeps those dollars.
Okay.
And then when, for instance, the Health and Human Services wants to hire somebody that we accounted for, they ask for the money back from OMB.
Okay.
Now, and so it's it saved us about $20 million.
Wow.
Wow.
But what we had to do this cycle was restore those employees back into the base budget.
Okay.
And then fund the ones that were hired.
Sure.
And then start the process over again. So next session, it'll be clear. It'll be clean.
Back to, be able to start a fresh slate at that stage.
But I tell you, I'll consider myself a freshman sitting on the committee. I'm looking at it going, I don't know what we're doing.
Right. Yeah.
So it takes a lot of time outside of the hearings. It takes talking to chairmen, experienced legislators. We do rely in many cases on lobbyists and agencies to give us their input.
Okay.
It's sometimes a dirty word, but they're the experts.
Right. Yep. Makes sense. So, you jokingly say that, you're a freshman there, but with term limits, that truly is going to be the role of a freshman. And you have experience in handling all this. As you jump into this and kind of see how things are going again, this is not your first rodeo. Does term limits worry you at all? More or less?
Well, term limits worry me for North Dakota.
Right.
Don't worry me for me.
Yeah.
We've got second session legislators in leadership positions that are relying on people that have been there 20 years.
Sure.
Yeah.
Those people that have been there 20 years are not going to be somebody you can turn to in 4 years.
Exactly.
I think we are placing a lot of pressure on legislators that are going to be in their third and fourth session to be in leadership positions. I'm talking majority leader, appropriations chairman,
the whole thing.
That have only been there for maybe one session prior at that stage.
Yep. And we're going to have to put people in that position preparing for it.
Yeah.
Yep. Right.
We'll have to be almost a pipeline to get them ready for that next step at that stage.
Yep. So a difficult portion of that, there's two, or at least two things in the bills that you guys have that could affect term limits. One of them is establishing a date. So that way people that were midterm when term limits came into effect get to serve another term rather than only serving 6 years, they'd be able to serve 10 years. And then the other one is a potential measure that would go on the ballot, allowing a third term, allowing 12 years total. Do you feel like the legislature should be able to go and make some of these changes or adjustments to term limits?
Well, we're not making the adjustment. We're putting it on the ballot.
Right.
If that passes.
Right.
And it has to pass, obviously, both chambers to get on the ballot, at which point it would be a constitutional amendment that has to be voted on in the general election so that we have the most voter turnout.
Right. Yep.
I support putting it on the ballot.
Yeah.
Now, that isn't just legislators. That's 12 years term limiting all statewide offices except for the governor's office.
Okay.
Which stays at
8.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Do you think that just at this point, would it speculatively, it would be on the 2026 general election?
Yes.
If it were to pass the House and Senate. Yeah.
Okay. Exactly.
Perfect.
It'd be the November of 26 election.
Perfect.
Very good. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking today about property tax, and we're kind of working through a couple of other topics first as we build there. And another one that I feel like term limits plays into, and we just talked a little bit about
You're
this.
going to take where I was about to go.
Okay. And that is the legislative cycle of right now it's every other year. Do we feel like with term limit, and I think there's probably two answers to it, but I feel like term limits goes and puts a little more thrust behind this. Do we feel like there's a chance that we need to, not just this is something we should look at, we need to go to an every year cycle, whether that's limited or however that works?
Well, every session that's come up in my time, I voted against annual sessions until this year.
Okay.
This year, not only am I supporting it, I went into the committee, one of my former committees, and testified in favor, and then I spoke in favor on the floor.
Wow.
Okay.
I see a lot of benefit in the measure that was put before us. It is not a constitutional amendment, so it keeps the 80 days in the Constitution. It just mandates the legislative management spread out the session into two years instead of one. I see a lot of efficiencies in doing that. One of the biggest things I've been frustrated with is serving in the interim committees. Interim committees can put forward bills as a result of a study.
Okay.
Very few legislators really remember by the time we get past crossover what interim committee study they had 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
To me, if we were to do, if we were to go to annual sessions, we could then extend our standing committees into the interim. And I'll use industry, business, and labor for an example.
Sure.
That committee could be a joint committee of House and Senate members.
Okay.
They could hear legislation introduced. They could act on it. They could pass it out with a do not pass or do pass.
Yep.
That first week we come back into January. The first 2 days are always ceremonial, state of the state, budget addresses, that sort of thing. Days 3, 4, and 5, we don't do anything on the floor.
Okay.
We could have days 3, 4, and 5 be 6 hours of voting on bills that were heard over the last year.
All those committee bills that
All of that
went through.
stuff.
Yeah.
If we did that, we'd knock out 70, 80 bills, and then we would be right on course, starting the session with fewer bills and the opportunity to better vet what's before us. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I'm advocating for it, but it does not increase the number of days we actually gavel in.
And that's the important part right there to remember.
And I know I've hammered on this one plenty, but I think just being able to spread it out over a yearly process really helps at least efficientize or maybe even cut down on this total number of bills. Having almost 1,100 in this cycle it seems like a lot.
Well, so if we move into property tax, think about if this were the case now.
Yeah.
And the property tax bill that is numbered 1168, which is my bill, I made that public in February of last year.
Sure.
Right.
If I had the opportunity to present that to finance and tax in July,
Spring or summer of last year. Yep.
we probably wouldn't have had 50 other bills.
Right. You were one of the
Because they would have
first.
seen that, and they could say, well, I want to place an amendment on that bill. The committee then could have held that for 3 months. They could have come back to it and got more input. The other thing that I'm seeing is because we had so many bills in each committee, there was a push for the chairman to get them out.
Sure.
We get them out.
Just try to hammer through it.
Yeah. And so you don't get the input that you need to get from the communities that are affected, from other legislators even coming in and speaking. So I think it's the better way to go.
Yeah. So somebody comments, and we'll address this comment now. They say, "Thank you, Scott, for your service to North Dakota. I want to know if it's worthwhile to send info regarding bills to representatives, or do reps just depend on lobbyists and committee and floor testimony?" So basically, if I email you, does that help, or do you just depend on testimony on floor?
Okay, so this one's sensitive.
Sure.
There is one bill that I introduced that we might talk about on behalf of the Secretary of State's office, what we call an agency bill. There were 3 other bills that I introduced for constituents that approached me before the session began and said, this is important to me or to us. And the rest of the bills I introduced as something that I thought through, property tax, for instance. We don't have staff. We don't have landlines coming to our desk. We rely on our phone and our email. There has been a barrage of emails coming to us, coming from an organization out in Fargo over the last 2 weeks that have inundated our inbox.
Yeah.
Okay. Just been blowing you up with emails at this. Okay.
It is very difficult to find those constituent emails buried when you have 300 all coming from the same source.
Right.
I prefer getting an email from a constituent. They can certainly call us. They can text. It is much more efficient to get a hold of us in December.
Sure.
Coming into session so that we have time to get the bill drafted.
Yeah.
We have deadlines in mid-January. We can't introduce bills after that anyway.
Yep.
Right.
So now it becomes an advocacy. I'm for or against legislation. If you are a constituent of a legislator, that carries a lot more weight than just a faceless email that comes to everybody from somewhere.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's got to be difficult. That's probably an actual strategy, though, that some of the groups use to just flood inboxes.
Yeah.
My industry does it nationally.
Okay.
I've always thought, well, we're proud of the number of emails we sent. That's going to a staffer in DC. They're keeping track of how many they receive. They probably read the message once and they multiply it times 50.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't have staff.
Yep.
We don't. So we get the emails in our inbox. Phone blows up. I did turn the alerts off a couple days ago.
At a certain point, you got to be able to.
I'll go back in tonight and I'll read the ones that
I think
I think
might be relevant. Yeah.
That's hard. That's hard.
Yeah, it makes it just it makes it a mess. It does. When you try to sort through everything, it takes away any kind of simplicity to it at that stage.
It does, and I think it takes away from the voice where somebody wants to be heard, and they are in a sea of. And I know I'm grasping the numbers here, but let's say I get 300 or 400 a day.
Yeah,
I might miss 2 of them.
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure. Right. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And even potentially they could get deleted on accident. I've done that myself with a business email.
I did ask legislative council, our tech support, how much storage space I've got.
Okay. Yeah.
I've got over 50,000.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Wow.
So
That's well used.
It makes it hard to delete them every single time you
I
get
keep
one.
them.
So you exactly.
So there have been some resolutions that come up, sending messages to various places. Positive one to North Dakota State University football team winning national championship again. Go NDSU.
One more time. Yeah.
I'm not. No, I didn't. And then there's others that are much more controversial, such as Greenland bill, gay marriage bill, and even one that's interestingly controversial. It's controversial. There's controversy about it being controversial, and that's congratulating Trump on winning the office, president. Do you feel like bills like this, the one for NDSU, I think that's a good bill, and I'm not really talking about that one, but I'm talking about these other ones that are making statements at a national stage that may never even really truly be heard or felt? Do you feel like they're productive?
They're not productive. You're talking about resolutions, not bills.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
It's a
Good correction.
statement on paper.
Yep.
That is sent somewhere.
Right.
In some cases, it's sent to the Secretary of State. Some cases, it's sent to Congress. Sometimes, for instance, when Minot High wins the state basketball championship for boys and girls.
All right, let's go Minot High.
When that happens,
When they double down.
when they double down, I'm going to get up on the floor and recognize the fact that they won.
Yeah.
They're in my district, and I do that when we win. And then the assistant majority leader makes a request to have my remarks printed in the journal, so they're there. They have the same effect as a resolution.
I see.
They're words on paper.
Yeah.
So the controversial ones cause more controversy.
Right.
And that's really what's happened this session.
Right. Yeah. That's difficult. It's kind of a bummer. Not as controversial as rhubarb becoming the state fruit, which I feel like there should be some controversy around that, but exactly.
That's the question.
That's the vegetable. That's the question.
See, controversy.
Yeah, exactly.
We can find it with anything, but with the resolutions too, it feels like a lot of these things are taking over space for other issues that could maybe be using a little bit more spotlight, and it's getting shown on some of these things that even if they were to pass or not, doesn't have a big effect.
Yeah. And there's been question, people have said, well, you're wasting time. We're there until we're done.
Exactly.
We're not getting paid overtime. We're not getting extra days. We're just there longer. The time that's wasted, if you look at it that way, is the attorneys and legislative counsel that are drafting these. They're going really nowhere. And when somebody has a bill that they want to, it's 25, 30, 50 pages, and then you have to amend it 6 or 7 times. That's being held back until we get all these other things done. So that's where the human resource time is wasted. We're not wasting any legislative time. We're just there until we're done.
Yeah.
Do you think, and not saying like on a 1-to-1 ratio or anything, but do you think it would be helpful if there was some form of a legislative staff provided you guys at the state level?
There was a bill to do just that. And I voted against it because it was extremely expensive. It likely would have placed retiring legislators back into position without the accountability to voters.
Okay.
I think staff would help, but $5,000 a month for each legislator, way too much.
Without a doubt at that point.
Yeah, and it feels almost like it might be necessary though. With term limits, I'm not a huge fan of how term limits is implemented. I am fine with term limits, but not how it's implemented. So I will continue to say stuff negative about it. We got property taxes. Let's talk property taxes next, and then we'll go to some Minot bills that might affect Minot more. So there's a few bills concerning property tax right now. Let's kick it off with the governor's bill, the bill deemed the governor's bill.
1176.
And that is going to supposedly, people say it reforms property tax. I don't agree that it's a reform of property tax, but people say it reforms property tax by simply providing a buy down and capping city spending at a 3% annual increase. And there's all the things that go on with that. Okay, but now it doesn't even over 10 years. Originally, our understanding was like over 10 years, it was going to have a full buy down that would happen. And now that's not even necessarily the case.
Okay, so 1176 is not a buy down; it's a tax credit.
Yeah, correct. Tax credit.
So the one I did, 1168, we'll get to, I assume.
Yeah,
we will.
So 1176 has flaws in it.
Mhm.
I've been vocal about them. What we'll call the governor's bill is, now the governor and I met when he was still a congressman last summer
He
twice.
was running. Yep.
And he was very supportive of the concept. I didn't know there was another bill that was being floated. But 1176 takes the $500 primary residence tax credit and increases it to $1,450.
Right.
Got some problems with it. Number one, you have to annually apply for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Number two, we have to re-up every 2 years. And the plan, as you mentioned, was to take it to its logical conclusion so that the tax credit available matched your tax liability,
Yeah.
zeroing out your primary residence.
Mhm.
Primary residence from a real estate perspective and a tax perspective is not a property type. It's a
Okay.
use of a property.
Fair.
Residential, commercial, and ag are types.
Yeah,
Primary residence and
point.
rental is use of a property.
Okay.
And
So-
technically, like, you can't even follow that on a loan application, because I could put primary residence on the home that I bought, and then I move somewhere else, and then I'm primary residence there.
Well, right.
Like, how do you track this?
Yeah.
You don't track it, you apply every year. And the other flaw that I see in this is primary residence properties change hands throughout the year.
Yeah.
I could buy a property that was somebody's primary residence and hold it as a rental.
Mhm.
What
Right.
happens to the tax credit?
Yep.
I could buy a property that was a rental and move into it as a primary. Do I get a credit that didn't exist?
Yeah.
At the very
See.
least, you'd almost have to have someone as an oversight to try to.
But there's
track
no way
all
you
of
can
those.
oversight.
Exactly. Like,
There's
it would
no
be-
oversight you can
it
provide
would
to
be
that.
Such a
And-
massive.
But this reveals, and I'm sorry, but I would get passionate here for a second.
Please.
This reveals the exact problem that I have with it,
Uh-huh.
because all this is trying to do is allow the cities, the taxing authorities, to spend however they want and give money to the people to make it feel like it's not happening. That's essentially what's going on here. And
Well, so I want to address that, because the $1,400 primary residence credit is state money
Mhm.
going to buy down your tax liability.
Yeah.
Right.
The 3% cap has flaws in it too on the other side.
Mhm.
And I introduced the 3% cap a little over a year ago as a placeholder. Just
as
let's put something there and have the talk. As I've talked to people, including a little over a week ago, with all the counties, the cities, the farm groups, school board association, everybody,
Yeah.
there are issues with the 3%, because half of your tax, generally half your property tax, is schools.
Yeah.
Mhm.
1176 has a 3% cap on schools, but it also mandates the mills that are levied.
So
So if you take your assessed value, you multiply it times the mandated mills, it cannot exceed 103%
Mhm.
in taxes. So what happens when your property value increases by more than 3%?
Yeah.
The state comes in and backfills what's called transition minimums.
okay.
We just spent the last 7 years getting out of that mess. 1176 as written puts us back in.
It would just
Nice.
open that door right back up.
Yay.
So we cannot, if we're going to mandate the mill levy at the state on K-12,
Mhm.
we can't cap.
Mhm.
They're already capped by the mills.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
So we can't do that. They can't go from 60 to 80.
Mhm.
Um,
Makes sense.
and they can't go from 60 to 55.
On the flip side of it.
On
Yeah.
the flip side,
Yeah.
they got to stay at 60. So if your assessed value goes up by more than 3% and they levy and they can't, the math doesn't work.
Exactly at that stage. And one thing that I know yours presented initially was that 60 mil buy down for the K through 12 part of it.
Yeah, it was 6 for all property
For all,
types.
yeah.
That 60 mils, at the time it was scored about $760 million.
Sure.
It's down to 720. Every mill for K-12 costs $12 million.
Mhm.
So at 10 mills currently, it's 120.
Mhm.
That takes us from 60 down to 50. I think it's best to just buy the 60 mills out and be done with it,
Mhm.
and not have the credit. That solves a lot of problems. And the beauty of it is we've done this before and we know it works.
Yeah.
It's easy to implement. It's not, you don't have to apply for it. It gets assessed against the property, levied against the property, all property types, ag, commercial, in-state, out-of-state owners,
Mhm.
everybody.
It's not as direct or not. It's not as specific. It's a lot more broad to all property types rather than just trying to specify the primary residence.
Right. And so I want to be clear about this process. It started, as you mentioned, 60 mils for all property types.
Yep.
I introduced an amendment to take it to 30 mils for residential,
Okay.
which is in North Dakota, 3 units or less,
Sure.
including mobile homes, condos, townhouses, everything. The committee that heard it, I brought back another amendment for 30 mils for all property types. They amended it. They accepted that and immediately amended it down to 10.
Wow.
Okay.
So, I mean, when I say immediate, I'm talking 5 seconds later.
And that's
Wow.
what's gotten passed through the
That's
the
what's
House.
sitting in the Senate
Yep.
right now.
Yep.
Interesting.
Which is okay because we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah. And there's plenty of maneuvering that can be happen to it in the Senate still at this point as
There's
well.
going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
So as we talk about this property tax reform, and perhaps your bill addresses it more than others, but is there a way for a bill to come forward that more than just capping cities and other taxing authorities, that it actually encourages them to decrease their budget?
Well, so 1168 as it sits has the 3% cap
Mhm.
with a 1-year carry forward of unused cap space. So think baseball salaries.
Mhm. That's
You can
fair.
carry forward for 1 year. It encourages budgeting.
Mhm.
It also allows at a general or a primary election with a supermajority vote, additional levy authority by the residents in that voting district
Sure.
for 5 years.
Okay.
So if, for instance, Minot says we need a new water treatment plant, it doesn't fit into the budget. Minot, we're going to ask you for a yes vote.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They need 60%, and then they have additional levy authority for that long. Now, in the process, and I mentioned a week ago, Sunday, I talked to all these groups.
Sure.
One of the ideas that came up was, what if the number was 5 or 6%, or the consumer price index at a given date plus a point,
Sure.
whichever's higher.
Yeah.
Have that be the flexibility. Now, at 6%, if half of your property tax is schools, and schools are not subject to that,
Mhm.
the maximum your property tax could go up after providing relief would be 3%.
Okay.
And that might be something that we should work on and look at. There isn't the incentive to keep under budget is the carry forward provision in the bill.
I see. Makes sense. Yeah. Seems like right now, if you're a city, the best thing to do is just get your budget as high as you can, because
Well, that was the mentality during Measure 4.
it was.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's-
Right.
I think that's
I talked to school district members, school board members that were newly elected at
Yeah.
the convention. They said, in our district, we jacked up the mills as high as we could in anticipation
for that to
And I
pass.
said, now what are you going to do if
Right,
it doesn't
yeah.
pass? Well, I guess we're going to lower them maybe. Well, I don't know.
See, and that's the problem right
yeah.
there. That's a huge problem.
And I think that's why a lot of it did so badly as it did in the rural areas too around the state, is just that a lot of that fear of where it's going to come from at that stage.
Well, so the rural issue, and I didn't think about this in some of these districts, 90% of the school budgets in some districts is ag land.
Sure. Okay.
So if you're providing a primary residence tax credit,
Mhm.
the egg producers, the egg landowners are the ones that are footing the bill for schools.
Mhm.
They're not seeing any relief.
Not at
Right.
all, if anything.
So
yeah.
I wanted to get them in on this full package.
That's
Yeah.
good. So do you feel unbiasedly that your bill's the best property tax one?
Yeah, I wouldn't be here advocating for it, but I voted for all 3 of them.
Yep.
I said it in appropriations. I thank the committee for considering sending 3 out on the floor.
Yep.
There was a question, what was the strategy? At least our caucus, the Republican caucus, we never met on this. We didn't discuss it and say,
Right.
here's what the strategy is.
Mhm.
We let everybody on the floor vote. That bill, 1176, got 3 no votes, one of which I think the legislator that voted no admitted he didn't fully understand.
I see.
That happens.
Yep. Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
so it had a lot of support, but yeah, I feel, in 15 months of really putting research in,
Yeah.
I'm on version 7
Wow.
and I'm on amendment 4.
Wow.
I've listened to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I do think it's the best.
Were you, I should know this, but I don't. Were you the first one to get your property tax bill out there, or was there one before you? I know there was some that were planning on coming out, but you were one of the first.
Well,
When you-
officially we couldn't introduce it till
Right.
December 1st.
But I'm talking
Yeah.
about when you held your press conference. And
Oh, yeah. Well, interesting about that. I was the one that was taking all the arrows for you. The first question of every media outlet, probably when we met.
Yeah.
Are you doing this to defeat Measure 4?
right.
So
Okay.
there was a lot of legislators kind of in the background saying, let him take it.
Mhm.
Let them take
And
the
then
brunt of it.
If it fails, we've got something going, but we're not going to talk
I
about
see.
it publicly.
Yeah.
I was public about it and adamant that that was not in defeat of Measure 4. I said, if it fails, this is what I'm going to introduce.
Right.
And it's gone through the amendment and the changes up to this point. It's going to have more changes.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting.
Are there any other changes that you would possibly foresee happening to it at this stage, just speculatively?
Well, speculatively, I think there are legislators that are thinking we're going to merge all three bills.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
So if you somehow change a little bit of the ratio, you maybe provide a credit, and then there's a buy down. I would prefer the buyout, but a buy down of K-12 mills. And then we get the capping right. I think we're going to end up, it's two ways to go. We could have three bills that focus on 3 or 4 different things that work together, or we could have one bill where everything that's good gets put in.
Yeah.
Right. Makes sense.
We're going to have relief and reform.
Yep.
It's going to happen.
That's the biggest
Sure.
deal that will come out of it.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's good for, I believe it will be good for the longevity of North Dakota, but
Yeah,
I hope the best route's chosen.
Yeah, I have no doubt relief is going to happen. And just if we can see that real good reform come of it too, that would be the best case scenario.
That we knew coming in, that was the biggest issue. It still is.
Yep. Undoubtedly got a lot to go further in that second half still. Any other, you want to touch on that other property tax bill that got pushed through as well? Did you voted yes for that one as well, right? Again,
Yeah. I think a lot of the mentality was get all three of them to survive.
Yeah.
Get them over to the Senate so they can, because they didn't have much to listen to.
Yeah. 1575.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was Speaker Weiss's bill.
Yeah.
1575 does place a cap on your property itself.
Sure.
But I am convinced that when you do it on the budget, for somebody that has an 8% increase in their value, you have to offset that with a decrease in someone else.
Yeah.
The assessors aren't going to do that.
Yeah.
So I like what we have going on.
That's fair. Do you see any potential for a change in the assessment process?
Well, if we don't need to do that, if we cap the budget, your assessment could double.
And it's
then
not
your
gonna,
mills have to go down to stay under the cap.
Yeah.
So
it acts as effectively as a reform on it itself at that stage.
Right. There was a bill to go away from a dollar value and move it to a price per square foot.
Sure.
And that one's really hard to do for commercial. You can kind of do it for residential.
But then again, you get stuck in that muddied kind of thing of trying to determine what's like your primary residence and then the residence is the residential versus if you try to differentiate those from each other again.
Well, and the value of a square foot in Bismarck is different than Mandan, and it's certainly different in Washburn up to Minot.
Yeah.
So that's difficult to do.
No, without a doubt, it can be so subjective at that point. It's a lot easier, and hopefully with all three of these going in there, it can really get a broad spectrum of everything encompassed.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of discussion in the second half, and then of course when the Senate makes their decision, it still comes back to the House for our approval. So that's that third that we were talking about.
Yeah,
right.
That last portion of it where everyone has to confirm everything at that stage.
So we're going to move to flood control in a minute, but before that, I want to go to one that's failed. It's done.
Yeah.
Okay. But it was an interesting one that came forward that has direct impact on some of the stuff that's happened in Minot. And that was about the open records and changing some of the open record stuff. It would have made it where records cannot be requested. I believe it was 3 years. It was a rolling 3 years, or termination. There was a certain time limit with termination, and it would have also increased how long an investigation could take. Basically, giving it
like doubling the time,
160 days or something like that. 180 days maybe.
I think,
So question is this, obviously you introduced it, probably there was, I believe it came up at a forum that was held in Minot, or a council meeting type deal that was held in Minot with the legislators. Do you feel Minot's very sensitive to this because of the police investigation that happened, but do you feel like this is something that 3 years, I think that was the biggest sticking point, was the 3 years. Like where do you stand on that part of it?
I introduced it at the request of a constituent.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Again, as one of the bills I mentioned, and the preponderance of the evidence, we'll call it, was this would allow for merit-based pay if we had actual real employee evaluations, as opposed to the boilerplate, you're doing well, everybody gets 3%.
Yeah.
Right.
So the intent was to move to a merit-based pay system. That's how it was presented to me. Now, the flip side of that is you're now reducing transparency in government. So you see the dichotomy in introducing the bill. So I introduced it. I let a couple members from city government come up to the committee and speak. The committee didn't like the bill. They were putting a do not pass on it in exchange for the Senate because they had an extra day or
Sure.
extra week to work on it. Senator Bob Paulson reintroduced it with some changes, and then the Senate put a do not pass and actually voted the bill down too. So that was one of those things where you're looking at, do we want to reduce transparency or do we want to increase efficiency? And I think the Senate sided on, we don't like the reduction in transparency.
Right.
And voted no.
Yeah.
Fair.
Difficult part of government right there.
Yeah. On like a flip side, obviously it's too late now, maybe in the future. Could you see like a possible situation where they just amend the investigation period to try to lengthen that rather than get the time frame of the records associated or involved?
Well, that's the opportunity that you have when you introduce one or two bills.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the committee says, okay, we see where you're going. We don't like section 1. We're going to take that out. We're going to amend section 2 and make that happen.
Fair.
It's a strategy thing that happens. In this case, everything was thrown into one bill. The House didn't like it at all. The Senate didn't like it, but a little better.
Yep. So you had to move on.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably that's got to be one of the weird. And I know we've talked about it with city council people, but when you go and you put all this work into a bill and it gets voted down, it has to be a little defeating. But you have to move on. You don't have time to lick your wounds or anything.
Okay, liken this to sports. You work out for your whole career. You get to the championship or you get to the semifinals, you lose, and you got to play again tomorrow in the third place game. In the
Exactly.
It happened to both our hockey teams. So let's
Yeah.
talk Minot High.
Yeah.
Right.
We got two of the best hockey teams in the state.
Yep.
They both lose in the semis.
Right.
But they had to play the next day.
That's hard.
Also having to start their game at almost 10 p.m.
Yeah,
wasn't
so you
it?
got to get up early.
Yeah.
No, you got to get past it, and it's frustrating. You put all that time in, you start to doubt yourself. Why did I do that? Is it worth it?
Yeah.
But then you look at the next bill, and that bill matters to somebody else just as much as the one that failed that you had. So
Absolutely.
it's just part of what you do.
It is. You can't comment on this as a whole, but do you think there's the ability for people to vote against a bill based off the person presenting it because maybe some things didn't go their way? And I'm not asking you to comment as a whole, but those thoughts, do those thoughts ever come, or have you heard those thoughts or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're human,
Right. Yeah.
that
Exactly.
happens.
Yeah.
You look at that and you think, how did that guy or gal get up and see it so wrong?
Exactly.
They spoke against my idea. They
Right.
said it was bad. You hear that on the floor once in a while. This is a bad bill.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not bad to somebody.
Right.
Exactly.
And so you sit back and think, should I take that personal? Am I frustrated?
Right.
Hey, I'm going to vote. But when it really comes down to voting, you look at the merits of the bill as best you can.
Yeah. You have
And
to.
you have to separate that personal stuff.
Right. At the end of the day, that's where the vote actually comes from. In the moment, you're like,
But that probably happens at city council. It happens in
Oh,
Congress,
Across the board. Yeah.
everywhere.
oh
I'm
man.
sure you might have even experienced it at the school board already.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe
I
not
mean,
to
it
that
happens
extent,
everywhere
but
I've
yeah,
served.
exactly.
Exactly. It's because there's humans, like you said.
Yeah.
As long as there's humans involved, that will be there because people have
We're
feelings.
not at AI yet for
Yeah.
legislation.
Crazy.
Thankfully.
Everybody thinks a little different still.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Exactly.
So there's a flood bill that came up. I think it's HB 1020. And so this has a chance to affect Minot and some of the work that's going on with the flood prevention that's going on here, for lack of a better word, because my brain is struggling here. But can you break down? Are you familiar with HB 1020? Can you break that down a little bit for us?
Yeah, so I think everybody is well aware that the bids that were coming in for the next phases
Yes.
are extremely
Right.
Just a little
Inflated.
inflated. Yeah.
So we're not finding the contractors, nor are we finding the money to continue where we're going. And we had, I believe, $75 million set in the budget for Minot for this cycle in the Water Commission budget. That's House Bill 1020. We were able, through our division within appropriations, to get that appropriation up to 125 million, with the help of some of the people working for Minot and coming down, and then of course the legislators from Minot and Steve Swantak, a legislator from Fargo. So we, on paper, have an additional $50 million. My concern with going higher than that was, could Minot match our local cost share?
Sure.
Do we have enough money? We have the ability now to borrow another $40 million to be able to pay back long term to meet our match.
Mhm.
And so I think we could go even a little higher than 125 this biennium, but we can't drag this out another 12 years.
No.
This has to
That's-
get done.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was really beneficial compromise to the citizens of Minot
Mhm.
that we're able to get that upfront funding, another $50 million to shave years off of this project.
That's huge.
One thing I've always equated it to, and I understand it's two wholly different situations, but when the Grand Forks flood happened in 1997, by their effect, it was, I think, 12 years after they were fully done with their flood control. And we're going on 14 years and it still doesn't have that much of an end in sight.
Yeah. The Grand Forks project.
It was a lot more
unfortunately,
straightforward.
It was straightforward for them. Ours it has a lot more intricacies in it.
The mouse weaves a lot more.
And it weaves, you're
Yep.
right. You know, down in the valley and then turning and going back north.
Yep.
My understanding initially, well, I got pretty involved in that publicly.
Mhm.
About $1 billion project is now about 1.8 billion.
Sure.
You know, all these years later.
Yeah.
We can't keep going down this road.
Right,
We got to
yeah.
get it done.
Yeah. The longer it waits, the more that price tag is just going to keep going up.
Some would say the tariffs will make it go higher, but that's a whole nother
That's a-
controversy
that's a
that
whole
we're not here
different
for
story.
today.
Hey, those
Yeah,
are in
moving
place
on.
now too.
Moving on, right?
Moving on.
Do you have anything else that you,
You
wanted to
have
touch on 10?
HB 1206 that you
How
want to
did
go.
you know I had that pulled up?
I just had a feeling.
You have a HB 1206 that is going through as well right now. That is the one that is addressing some of the
Special punishment for causing injury or death while operating a vehicle
yeah.
while under the influence of alcohol
Yeah,
or any other
yeah.
drugs or substance.
hardens some of those
Yeah.
things that'll happen to people. Yeah, consequences. There we go.
Forgive me if I don't remember all the
You're-
bills.
there's a ton.
I
You're-
remember
11,
some of
That's
them.
fair.
1,100 of them.
Yeah. Okay, so that bill, that was an amendment that I tried to get on a Senate transportation bill in the House last session.
Okay.
And it got on it, and the House passed it. When it went to conference committee, the Senate took that amendment off because they said it wasn't germane. Here's the problem that we've got in the Century Code. If you are convicted of your second DUI that's aggravated with a minor in the car, it is a felony.
Mhm.
It says that specifically in the Century Code. The last sentence on that bill, if you read it, will say must be sentenced according to another section,
Okay.
which is the misdemeanor section of sentencing.
Okay.
Oh,
So what's happening is courts are looking at that saying that is a felony,
Mhm.
but the Century Code's telling us to sentence as a misdemeanor. Some courts are saying, no, it's a felony is a felony.
Mhm.
Some courts are saying it's a felony, but we have to sentence as a misdemeanor.
I see.
So it leaves that
So we're
ambiguity.
cleaning the language, saying specifically, if you do that a second time, that's a felony, and then you're going to be sentenced as such.
It is a felony and you should be punished that
Yep.
way. Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a great little amendment that you guys put forward.
That
And-
came from Minot, where Minot
Perfect.
said this has been a problem in the Minot courts, the
That's
district
neat.
courts. In 2 years ago, it happened actually 3 times while we were
That's
in
right.
session.
That's right.
So that's
Yep.
what we're trying
Wow.
to fix.
That's-
I remember that one of those times. Yeah.
That's good. That's one of those things that could. I mean, it's mandatory sentences are a whole different conversation in and of themselves as well. But this could hopefully be something that could encourage or discourage people from doing something
Hope
like
so.
this. Yeah, fingers crossed for sure.
Another interesting topic that has come up, you have the school lunches. We talked about that a little bit,
Mhm.
and other K through 12 funding type bills that have come up. First off, school lunches, huge controversy on this one. So I'll put you on the spot with it. Like people, I don't know. I honestly, I see both sides, and I've said that I was for school lunches being paid for, but then the next day I was like, yeah, I don't know if I really feel that way. Where do you stand? What's your thinking as you go into that
Yeah.
topic?
So people are asking me this as not just a legislator, but a school board member.
Exactly.
Okay. So last session, we passed 2 bills that are being completely forgotten in this discussion. The first one was the anti-shaming bill. If a kid went to school and their parents didn't pay the lunch bill,
Mhm.
and it came up when they go through the line that there's a negative balance,
Mhm.
at some point the school district or the school started serving them what we'll refer to as a cold lunch.
Sure.
They got PB&Js.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay. So now they go sit at the table with their friends.
Yep.
Friends all have a hot lunch. This kid's eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Mhm.
Right.
It became obvious why.
Yeah.
We passed legislation that said every kid's getting a hot lunch. Okay. So you don't pay your bill, you're still getting fed.
Mhm.
That has led to some bad debt in school districts, including in Minot,
Sure.
somewhere between $20,000 to $30,000 at any
Wow.
given time. So how do you recover that? You send the parents to collections for a little bit of money. It's not worth it.
Mhm.
You fundraise, you write it off as bad debt.
Mhm.
Some people step in and just pay it. And there are ways to
Yep.
do this. I think it was in the paper today that there's a group of high school kids that are out raising money to pay
Gotcha.
the bad debt. So that was the first bill that we passed. So everybody's getting a hot lunch.
Mhm.
The second one was, If your family of 4 is at the 200% poverty level,
Sure.
or higher, then you got free and reduced. That was a $6 million fiscal note. So for 2 years that was in place. 3.5 million of that money was used.
Wow.
So we come into session and we're going, why, if we allocated $6 million, did only 3.5 get used?
Yeah.
Some of that answer is people didn't fill out the application.
Okay.
Sure.
I will promise I'm working on something behind the scenes to make that process easier and less shameful.
It's
Okay.
fantastic.
So if we take 6 million and look at the cost of what we have now for 140 million on that lunch bill that you're talking about, that was free lunch and free breakfast for every school kid, public and private.
Oh,
There
wow.
are people that are making $400,000-$500,000 that are getting free lunch.
Mhm.
So in, I believe it was House Bill 1036, as I just said, I don't remember all the numbers. We increased that 200 to 225, which is effectively a family of 4 making $73,000 or less
Mhm.
gets free and reduced lunch.
Okay.
Kids are getting fed. The kids that are choosing, that aren't getting hot lunch, are not eating hot lunch.
Gotcha.
It's provided to them.
Right. Makes sense. Do you feel like the state should be paying for the lunches for private school? Like that almost seems like a
Well,
weird line
moving
to
into
cross.
you're moving
Yeah.
into the other issue about the $40 million private school education savings account.
Yeah.
Doing it,
Yeah.
taking public money and paying for a private decision.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
I don't think we should be doing that. And I had a hard time with that ESA bill because that was $40 million. The per pupil increase right now that we've got is 2%. Last session
Sure.
it was 4 and 4.
Okay.
That money, generally 80% of that money goes back to the school district in the form of salaries to teachers and staff.
Sure.
Okay.
Now we're at 2 and 2. So for every 1% in that formula, that's $38 million. We've got a $40 million education savings account bill, and we're short 1% and 1% on the per pupil payment.
Mhm.
So to me, it sure looks like that 38 million shifted over here.
That's
Yeah.
what it's feeling like.
That's what it
Yeah,
feels like because
Yeah.
the numbers are close. Now, I don't think we're set on 2 and 2. I'm going to push for a higher number, but we're getting a revenue forecast this month. And if the revenues look a little better and some of the other bills fall off, we'll see a more than a 2 and a 2 increase.
Fair.
Now, I'm going to go back to my argument about the 60 mil buyout. If everybody had 25% or so of their property taxes reduced, now you can afford lunch.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
now you can do some things.
Yeah.
So that other bill solves a lot of problems, not just property tax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would make the school lunch bill, it could make the school lunch bill redundant to that point.
Well, and the school lunch bill failed in the House.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
it's already
that's
done.
pointless.
The one we're
stage.
referring to.
Yeah.
The other one passed and it increased the threshold, as I mentioned.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
I think we're in okay shape.
Do you how has being serving on the school board and serving the legislature has that the new responsibility of serving on the school board, has that affected any decisions or how you viewed things? Or
Yeah, there's been issues that have come up just in our division. So I'm in the education environment decision on appropriations.
Sure.
I've been able to speak a lot more intelligently and with some experience, even in my short term on the school board, to the DPI budget, for instance, on obviously the per pupil payment and some of the things that affect schools generally, not just Minot. So that's really where I'm focused heavily.
that's neat.
And I've not had that focus in the past because I was on policy committees.
Right.
So I think it's been a good marriage between the two positions.
Obviously there's some advocates that are like, don't really like this because, two different places that you're serving, but it almost sounds like it's something you would encourage others to consider doing. If it was right, everything needs to be unique. There's no blanket statement you can make, but.
Well, I'm not the only legislator serving on the school board currently.
Right. Yep.
There was one in Stanley 2 sessions ago. There is one in West Fargo now.
Yep.
It's not easy. I've had to call in and do a remote meeting twice.
Sure.
I'm going to do everything I can to make it physically to the meeting.
Yeah.
At the school board, but if we're on the floor of the House or I'm in committee, I told the voters that I'm going to do the best I can, but there might be a time during session I can't physically be at the board meeting, but the board has allowed for my remote attendance.
That's good.
Okay.
So,
And you guys even pushed the board meetings back again for the school board from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Correct?
Kept them there.
Or you kept, or excuse me. Yeah, you changed.
We changed it and we kept it there.
Yes.
There is and I got to say this, there wasn't a lot of participation after we switched it. We moved it later in the day.
Mhm.
You get in the room and there's 6
Even
people.
less.
So,
It's a
maybe there's
problem.
more watching online, but that was the intent, was to get more participation. So far, it hasn't really played out. I guess we'll see over the next year.
Yeah.
That's fair. School year wrapping up, see how it plays out going forward
Yeah.
there a little bit.
For sure. Come on, Minot. Let's show up. So, all right. Well, what's your thoughts as we end the crossover period and begin the second or the 2/3
Yeah.
remaining of the legislative session? What are some of the things that you anticipate? Obviously, property tax reform, but what are some of the things you anticipate getting accomplished?
Well, there's about 25 bills that I really honed in on, not just ones that I sponsored, but things that I thought mattered
Mhm.
that came out of the House. So that's where I was educated and experienced.
Mhm.
I have not looked at all the bills coming over from
Yep.
the Senate yet.
Makes sense.
I'm going to see, obviously, the budget bills. That's really what we focus on. One of the bills assigned to me in appropriations will be the state fair budget. I think that's appropriate, being from
Yep.
Minot.
Makes sense.
Not a very detailed budget, but that's something that I'm going to be looking at and probably getting some enhancements for the state fair. We're going to have some controversies, I'm sure, but this I will say will be the one session I'm going to look at the Senate more than I did before on the House bills.
Fair.
I'm going to track more of what's going on over there than I have in the past.
Sure.
Gotcha.
So maybe another week or two, I could say, here's what I see coming up with the Senate bills coming to us. Right now, I want to see the stuff that we passed over there, almost
Yep.
all that we passed over there.
Makes sense.
End up going through at that
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
And so then the schedule works where there's like some, I could be wrong on this, but there's some committee meetings starting again tomorrow, I believe, and then full gavel days begin again on Monday.
Yep.
Very good.
Yep.
Very
It's
good.
exciting. It's almost time to jump back into it.
I bet the break is not long
This
enough.
It has not been time off. And
Right.
I said
Not
on
even a little
another
bit, I
interview,
bet.
I haven't had time for 2.5 months to even wash the floor mats in my car. I
Exactly.
got that done.
There we go.
So
That's good.
just the little stuff, but it's been time at work. I have a
Yeah.
business to run.
Yeah.
Right.
Getting face to face with people that work for me, meeting with some clients. The things that you would expect to do on a daily basis have been put off for 2 months.
Right. So we're coming to an end, but I mean, this is such a huge thing right here that it just gets glossed over. I'm serving, but people are making incredible sacrifices in their work life, or their employer is making an incredible sacrifice
To allow them to.
and maybe some are just quitting their job. I have no idea, but like it's crazy because you're straight up gone from your job basically for 3 or 4 months here.
Yeah. In fact, I had a meeting today with the people that work in the Minot office. And I said specifically, I'm going to reiterate this. If the house is on fire, call me.
Mhm.
And I'm saying that, figuratively.
Yes,
Yep.
but
If there's something extremely urgent, work related, call me.
Right.
If I'm not physically in front of a mic and testifying, I'll step out of the committee hearing and I'll answer your call.
Yeah.
Everything else, please text me. You'll get an answer quickly.
Right.
And they've been great about it.
Mhm.
But there have been times where they've said, I need to talk to you right now.
Right.
That's happened with my kids as well.
Mhm.
I'm one of few legislators that drive back and forth.
Often.
Every other week, I drive back and forth almost every night.
Mhm.
Okay.
unless it goes extremely long, kind
Even
of
then,
thing. Even
I've
fair,
come
you
home
make
at
it happen.
10:30 at night.
Good for
I've
you.
Gotcha.
said goodnight to my kids who were already sleeping, and I had to get up before.
They
Yeah.
go to school.
Yeah. And I've done that on the off weeks where I don't have my kids and I'm coaching their team. So
Sure.
I drive
Mhm.
back to coach a 4th grade girls basketball game at 8 at night
Right. Yep.
and then back to Bismarck.
Mhm.
So it's,
Which, I mean, obviously spending time with your kids more fun, but I mean, coaching or being in the legislature, both of those, I'm not taking a dig. Okay. I am taking a dig, I guess. But what I'm saying is that's gotta try your patience of what I'm saying. You go and you be
Spend
in the
all
legislature
day.
all day and then you get to go and be like, dude, no, I told you to go over here.
Dribble.
It's a fun time. I'm not, it's those are long days for you is my
That's not-
point.
that's-
I have to admit, of the 9 games the 4th grade girls played, there was one time I had to call a timeout because I was frustrated.
Yeah.
One time.
Yeah. Hey,
And then
that's
I
really good.
recognize, we're talking 10-year-old girls.
Exactly.
Their
They're just
parents are
having a
all
good
smiling
time.
and they're happy. So
Everyone's having a fun time.
everybody was except the coach for one moment.
Exactly.
We won that game. by the way.
Yeah,
There we
even
go.
better.
That's what matters.
And I
So,
think that just kind of circles back to a point we were talking about earlier. If it did go to a yearly session, do you think it would make home life more manageable for legislators?
Well, yeah, because what I would envision that to be is 2 months, January, February, you're voting on bills.
Yep.
And then we're home.
Yep.
And so we're probably done by the first week of March. I think it would be easier for other people to serve. I think their employers would be more willing. It'd certainly be easier on families. I even said this on the floor. I joked about it. I said, you guys at the floor of the House,
Sure,
you probably get sick of me by the beginning of April or March. And so you get mentally fatigued.
Yeah.
Those 13-hour days, you got to make good decisions. And the
Right.
most important bills are the last ones.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
It's the
that's
stuff-
where you want to be at your best.
Yeah, it's that stuff that's been debated the whole time.
Yep.
They've had amendments added on and taken away, and it's the stuff that you have to be sharp for at that
Yeah.
stage.
And that's when it matters.
Exactly. And it's a grind. It can wear on a person at a point,
does.
I'm sure.
Well, I appreciate you taking time out to spend some time with us. It's been good to get your perspective of what you're doing with down in Bismarck.
All right. Let's do it again sometime.
Let's do it.
Fantastic. We look forward to it.
All right.
Appreciate it. Thank you for watching today's special edition of Minot Talk. We'll be back this Thursday, 8 a.m. with conversation with Leif Snyder on Minot City Council.
Happened last night.
There we go. We'll see you guys.